Peter, though. Well, welcome back, everyone. Well, I imagine Peter will be, actually, did we lose Jared as well? I think we did. Okay. So I don't know what happened. Guess we'll give it a minute. I see Peter coming in. We can blame it on all the construction.
I don't know what happened. I got booted, so I had to restart and come back in. I apologize.
No, I think we lost Jared too. Well, we'll try to get started. Welcome everyone to the Bourne Board of Sewer Commissioners April 13th, 2021 meeting, 6:30 p.m. Meeting. We have, I believe it's 4 currently board members present. Jared McDonald should be joining us. Might have gotten disconnected. I don't know that we have anybody on the phone tonight, but just a reminder for the Zoom meeting that if you scroll to the bottom of the screen, there's reactions. You can raise your hand. Otherwise, we'd like to have the screens muted. And of course, we don't use the chat feature. So just please raise your hand and we will get to you. The majority of the workshop tonight is a workshop in the back end. So public comments will be taken up in the front. And then that allows the board to be able to kind of work through some of these bigger items in the second part of the meeting. So if you do have comments about any particular agenda item, under public comment would be the time to bring those forward. So I do see Jared has rejoined us, and the first order of business we have is the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you for that, Tony. The next item we have is the approval of our open session sewer meeting minutes from March 23rd, 2021. That was our last meeting.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of March 23rd, 2021.
Slade will second.
Motion Froman, second Slade. Any discussion? Okay. Seeing none. Roll call vote. Judy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Jared,
Yes.
Jim, yes, unanimous, 500. Okay, so are you ready, Judy, for correspondence at all?
Tim, I am never ready for correspondence at the
It's
beginning.
okay. It's okay. It comes up early.
I know. I think I'm just wired for it to be near the end. I'm so sorry.
The correspondence we have tonight is mainly from some residents. The message is pretty much the same about the retained earnings and changing the amount of the retained earnings to a higher amount for the rates. And I believe we also had a correspondence that was similar to that, but the message was a little bit different about new development, and that new development should pay and not the existing users. So that was the majority of the correspondence that we've received since our last meeting. And those are all found in the correspondence section. So but for the record, I was able to reach most everyone that did communicate with us, and I did speak with them about their correspondence. So they did get feedback. And then I think a couple actually sent some follow-up. So that's good. And of course, we have more discussion tonight, similar topics. So item 2C is public comment. If there's anyone from the public, I see Mary Jane Mastrangelo. Don't see anyone else. So Mary Jane.
Thank you. You have a very hefty workshop agenda this evening. I have comments on 3A, 3B, and 3C. So my comments on 3A, which is the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan study. First of all, there was a list of documents that should be reviewed, and one of the things that I think that should be added is the April 2018 preliminary engineering report that was done for our SRS application. It was very comprehensive and may provide some information and reduce duplication of efforts. My second comment has to do with phase 2 identification and screening of alternatives, especially page 7 of 12. There are references to providing alternatives to the Board of Sewer Commissioners, and that based on the discussion with the Board of Sewer Commissioners, the commissioners will decide upon and recommend alternative strategies for the detailed evaluation in phase 3. I want to note that the Board of Sewer Commissioners has authority over sewers and storm drains. The Board of Health has authority over on-site systems and small package treatment plants. I'm not sure who has authority over aquaculture. There's no reference in this section to meetings or joint meetings with the Board of Health or any other committee of board who has authority in the options being discussed. This section should identify the types of stakeholders that should be involved and should describe how they will be included in the discussion and the decision-making process. Also in phase 2, under the first bullet on page 7, on the study of alternatives on a regional option, there should be some wording on the discussion of governance of the regional option. Buzzards Bay Coalition has recommended a regional wastewater partnership be established that creates an independent authority governed by a commission made up of representation from each of the communities. This is an important part of the discussion for any regional solution. Governance will be really important, as we have found out. My fourth comment has to do with the public participation section that to me is somewhat unclear. While there's discussion of public workshops and meetings, the stakeholder meeting schedule lists only 10 townwide meetings and seems to list 4 of those meetings as meetings with the Board of Sewer Commissioners that are public participation meetings. One of the meetings is a townwide public hearing, and 4 of the meetings are unclear as to who is participating. It appears to be the Board of Sewer Commissioners, but not a public participation meeting. So would this be like a workshop format of the Board of Sewer Commissioners that's not, subject to public comment? There are 2 public hearings with the Cape Cod Commission. There's 1 meeting for a targeted population north of the canal and 1 south of the canal in the initial discussion of wastewater issues. So although there's a description of workshops to ensure engagement, including breakout sessions, it is not clear from the chart which of the 13 meetings listed would include that kind of participation. The contract does not list a total number of meetings that is included in the contract. And my experience is that sometimes what the town is expecting for meetings is not the same as what the consultant thinks is included in the contract for meetings. I will add again that since the Board of Health needs to be included in this discussion, it would probably make sense for the planning board and the capital outlay and the finance committee to be involved in the discussion, and some thought should be given on meetings and what meetings should include them, and identification of stakeholders that should be included in the discussion is really important. That's it for the comprehensive wastewater plan. Since you're taking all the public comment at once, I'm going to talk about agenda item 3B now, which is the equivalent residential unit, ERU, system development charge. I have the same comment that I had the last time this was on the agenda. There is nothing in the packet that shows what the ERU is or how it is calculated or what the formula is. If the members of the Board of Sewer Commissioners have documentation on what they're voting on, it would be helpful for the public to see. It is difficult to evaluate whether this is a good idea or a bad idea unless examples are given. It's also unclear when the system development charge would apply. Does it only apply to new connections to the sewer system, or does it apply anytime there's a change of ownership or a change in use that required planning board approval? I'm very confused about this. I will note that one of the documents included in the packet for item, oh, no, I'm not going to say that. All right, then I'm going to go on to 3C, which is the sewer policy and regulations. My comments are going to be limited primarily to the section 1 and section 2, which was kind of confusing in the last meeting because what was on the website was completely different than what you were discussing. So I went through the policy and regulations dated March 19th, sections 1 and 2, and attachments A, B, and C, and I have about 20 comments. So I start going through them. Section 1.2, it says no person shall, without prior authorization from DPW and or the Board of Sewer Commissioners, make any connection with or opening into, alter, or disturb the town's wastewater systems. And my comment really comes from the fact that in the document, sometimes the term wastewater systems is used and sometimes sanitary systems is used. So in section 1.3b, it talks about connecting to the sanitary sewer systems. So I think it's good to use consistent wording in the document, either way, or to clarify whether when they're talking about wastewater systems, does it include both sanitary sewer systems and stormwater systems? I mean, are we differentiating in what we're saying? And consider adding definitions of wastewater systems and sanitary sewer systems and stormwater systems if all 3 of those are going to be used. That's my section 1.2. Section 1.3, rates and fees. So A is a section on allocation fees. So my question is, should this be preliminary allocation fees? Section 2.3 refers to preliminary allocation, and it's not clear what the difference between allocation, preliminary allocation, operational allocation, and existing allocation. These need to be defined, and they need to be used consistently in the document, or when make sure that the document is clear about which allocation fee you're talking about. So one of the things it says is that, so the allocation fees are based on the allocation policy as set forth by the Board of Sewer Commissioners. The charge is specified by wastewater capacity, assigned to a specific project on a specific parcel or parcels upon a majority vote of the board. All allocations to the project shall be based on state and local regulations. So my question is, should this say all preliminary allocations should be based on state and local regulations? Because what happens is when you're in the preliminary allocation process, you're using those state regulations, but later on when you get to operational and afterwards, that can be reduced. So I think it needs to be clear. And then it says the transfer of all or a part of an allocation is prohibited unless approved in writing by the board. And so I'm wondering again, is this again the preliminary allocation? So throughout that whole section, I think it has to be clarified. And then it says, see attachment C. So attachment C, when you look at attachment C, it says, the Board of Sewer Commissioners require that any property that is either changing business entities in an existing building, even if presently connected to sewer, or connecting to the sewer system for the first time, to fill out this form to ensure wastewater allocations and connections. So to me, it needs to be defined as what changing business entities means. I mean, if I change from an S Corp to an LLC, is this going to trigger this? The form originally was geared to preliminary allocation and to a new development. And there are questions on it about financing, which make a lot of sense when it's a preliminary development and it's under, you want to make sure that it's a real development. It's not just someone, especially back in the days when there was like a moratorium and it was like, yeah, I'm going to get my allocation, sit on it for 5 years. So, and it's not clear whether a property that's so ongoing, like if it's a property that's connected to the sewer and it's a restaurant, and then the restaurant is sold and it's going to be the same restaurant with the same seats, do they have to go through this and provide all their financing? It's just very, the form is not clear. And once again, is there a difference between preliminary allocation and operational allocation, and how is that sort of done? The next section is section B, which is the sewer development fee. And then in parentheses, it says connection charges. So note on the certificate of vote of 2006, which is in attachment A, it lists these as different fees. There is this a sewer system development fee, or is it a system development fee, or is the sewer development fee, or is it a connection charge? So on the 2006, there's a sewer development fee, and then there's a connection charge. So I'm not really sure about what this section is talking about. It's very unclear because it's referring back to that section, that attachment A again. And so it's combining the two things. It says applicants must pay a connection charge to connect to the sanitary sewer systems. These charges are one-time charges for connecting to the Bourne sanitary sewer system. And that goes back to, is it wastewater system or sanitary sewer? So I'm not really sure about this section. Neither of these fees are clear to me as to what they refer to and what they're doing. And before the board votes on it, I think that should be clear. Then that section 1.3C is on sewer rates, in parentheses, user charges. And it says the current rates are outlined in attachment A. And what's in attachment A are the rates that were voted in, I think, July of 2020, not the rates that were voted in December of 2020. So they're not really the current rates, at least for the user charges. At the end of section 1.3, there's a section that says new and existing sewer service connections. And it says minimum application connection fees for the new and existing sewer services are calculated with current connection fees per equivalent unit included in attachment A. And there isn't anything in the attachment A that refers to per an equivalent unit. It's only units, it's not equivalent units. So that's a cleanup. Section 2.3 is obtaining a preliminary allocation. There's some wording issues with this. Applicant shall apply to the board for a preliminary allocation on a form attached here in attachment C. And I just want to note that that form is called wastewater allocation form. It's no longer calling a preliminary allocation. Then it says an application fee is due when the application is submitted. See attachment A, there's a spelling error there. And then it says, it says a weird thing. It says the application may ask for a meeting with town staff. So that wording has to be corrected. I think it should say the applicant should ask for a meeting with town staff to discuss possible solutions and then request a meeting with the board. If enough allocation is available, the application fee is paid and the project application will be deemed complete. I think there was a mix-up in the wording in terms of, I think it should say if enough application is available and the application fee is paid, the project application will be deemed complete. In this section, there's a lot of wording that's deleted that has to do with going on a waiting list. But at the end of the section, it says that the board will consider requests on the waiting list in the order in which they were dated. So if you delete the wording on the waiting list, I don't know how you're going to have a waiting list. So that's some more cleanup that needs to happen in that section 2.3. Section 2.3D. A lot of times there's a reference to project/parcels, and sometimes they talk about specific projects and sometimes they talk about parcels, and it says after the board's vote to grant a preliminary allocation, the applicant will be issued a letter signed by the town administrator certifying to the existence of a preliminary allocation for the specific project/parcels and including any conditions imposed by the board. And I think there needs to be some clarification about whether the allocation is for the specific project or for the parcel, or is it both? It just needs to be, because I think the practice has been in the past that it's a project. But then again, if the project is sold to another developer, the allocation kind of stays with that project. But it's just a cleanup of wording so that we don't get picked up on wording. I have just some brief comments on attachments. So as I said before, the Schedule A attachment, the fees are not the current fees. And what's troublesome to me is that there's not a coherence between what's in the policy in sections 1.2 and 1.3, I think, in terms of what the fees are to how they relate to that. And I think if you're going to have a policy and you're going to do that, you should make sure that the wording in the attachments is redrafted so that this is what we have, but this is what we're planning to have. There's an attachment B, which is like an application, general sewer application. And then there's an attachment C, which is the allocation application. And it's really not clear to me what the difference is and when one is applicable and when isn't applicable. I'm not sure if you always have to ask for an allocation and pay some fee. Is the wastewater allocation form a preliminary allocation form, or is it, and does it apply once there's an operational allocation to a property? So once again, the transfer and exactly when allocation is charged and exactly when sewer development is charged and exactly when connection is charged, I think really needs to be clear in the policy. I didn't look at much of the other stuff because I had spent a lot of time on this, but one thing I'll say is about attachment D, which is financial things regarding pump stations. And I wasn't sure what prompted this to be included. I don't know if there's been a problem where these pump stations have been a problem, or is it, you know, something that you're just thinking of added? I think it's kind of unclear as where these pump stations are. Are they on someone's property? Are they down the line? An explanation for the need and justification. And it doesn't, the one thing it struck me is not being very business friendly. I mean, if you're a developer and you're coming in and you're building a development and you're building a pump station, you're paying for the pump station, you're paying all these fees, this is requiring that you also set aside or have financial certainty for a pump station that 20 years from now. And people who are in business, you know, they're paying for their business expenses now and they're planning for the future, but they may be borrowing for the pump station that they have now and planning to borrow for the pump station in the future. So I just think some thought needs to be given to what the purpose of that is and whether or not it's business friendly in terms of, you know, welcoming businesses to Buzzards Bay and not being an impediment to a business relocating in Buzzards Bay. So thank you for your time. Those are my public comments. If you would, I have most of this written down, so if you want me to send copies of what's written so you don't have to do all your notes, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Was there anyone else from the public? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to our workshop, which is 3A, which is the first thing we're talking about tonight. And we have Helen Gordon from Environmental Partners here with us. Is the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan. We had this last time, but you know, we've had another few weeks here to look at it. So did anyone have any further questions on the plan? I don't see any. Helen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Could I add a few comments based on Mary Jane's comments?
Yes.
If that would be okay.
Yes.
So we certainly can clarify some of this information. On the table, you can add up the number of meetings. So in our actual contract, there is a list of all the number of meetings that we plan on attending. Thank you for that input on the Board of Health. One of the things that we've already started having conversations with the staff is what other departments need to be included in those meetings for decision making. So this is, the CWMP is under the purview, obviously, Mr. Chair, for the Board of Sewer Commissioners. However, there's a number of other entities that will be included. So we'll clarify that a little bit in the writing on there. So that was thing one. Thank you we'll include that report that you mentioned, the 2018 preliminary engineering report on the SRF submission. Mary Jane, I think you're referring to the one for the wastewater treatment plant. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah,
For
so
that.
we've been in communication with staff to get a hold of that. So we'll just add that to the list, though. We are aware of that. Thank you for bringing that one up. And let's see, the governance that agreed that in the two regional, in any regional option that we would look at, there'd be some conversation about what the governance would be. So that's would be included anyway. And I think that's it. So we can clarify a little bit better the public participation meetings, the first one that's coming up for the north and the south, and what that's going to look like. There'll be some information that will be posted on the website shortly for that. Other than that, unless the board members have specific questions.
No, Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would like to have Helen explain a little bit for the purpose and the need of this plan of study, just to make sure we have that. I know we talked about the last meeting, but this is a new meeting. We may have new folks on the audience, so maybe she could just give a little bit of an overview of the purpose and the need of this plan of study.
Right. So the comprehensive wastewater management plan is dictated for communities by Mass DEP and is a requirement. Under Cape Cod Commission, there's been a lot of work done over the years with the 208 plan, and this is the next step for Bourne to really assess the entire community and what the wastewater needs are as they relate to the health of your water quality, both on a potable water supply, your groundwater, and then also our bays and estuaries. So this will be a town-wide. In the past, there's been studies done that have focused more on north of Buzzards Bay because there's existing infrastructure there. And the intent of this, again, is to look at all wastewater needs, so throughout the community.
And I think what's worth noting to the board also, just to kind of add on a little bit to the plan. Obviously, we have the plan, and Helen's put together the plan, but the board can go beyond the plan. So we can have more public hearings if we desire as a board. It may not include environmental partners, but we could have a standing agenda item at every meeting that someone can come and talk about, something about the comprehensive plan in their area. And then that feedback gets to, our project. So we certainly can do that. And, there's if we see 10 meetings, that doesn't mean there has to only be 10 meetings. That just means that there's 10 meetings planned with environmental partners to, engage the public. But we can engage the public as many times as we choose to, and we should, and get, additional feedback so that it all can become part of the overall master plan. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, as you go through with any of these contracts with any of these engineering firms, virtually any project you talk about with large infrastructure, it is always part of the negotiations for the contract to talk about meetings. Meetings take time, the consultant's time, it takes effort, and that's money. That's a cost to the town. So we are very careful about the number of meetings. We're very careful that it is very specific in the contract of how many meetings they'll attend. And then staff is very watchful for which meetings the consultants do attend and which ones they don't attend. Again, it is easy to have large bills come in from the consultant to attend many meetings that you have to be judicious about which meetings you pick and choose for them to attend. So we do try to do that as we negotiate the contract with them.
Thank you. I think there might have been a question about aquaculture. Obviously, we could engage the DNR and some of our volunteer committees if, I'm sure it'll be explored, but I don't believe sewer commissioners deal with aquaculture, so I'm not familiar with what communities might be doing that and if their sewer commissioners have a big hand in that or not.
So aquaculture is a piece that we look at in terms of balancing the nitrogen limits in the watersheds. So there is a section on that, and we will be looking toward any kind of possibility associated with that. And early on, one of the things we spoke with the town staff was about engaging other entities to make sure to reach out and make sure that they're aware of when these public meetings are going to be and what the content is so they can engage. And we are also, we're going to be gathering information from the website from your website as well. So there'll be opportunity for people to send in comments after the workshops as well, for a period of about a week after the workshop for anything additional that people want to comment on.
Great. Tony?
Yeah, I just want to mention, related to aquaculture, there was just actually an article in the Cape Cod Times this morning because Mashpee's getting ready to present to the town they call it their clean water plan ahead of their town meeting vote. In that, they actually mentioned part of their plan, does include some aquaculture as another way to address the nitrogen loading and nutrient loading in some of their bays and estuaries. So it does have a place in the overall plan. We'll see what it means for Bourne, but.
Yeah, it does have a place, but you're required to have a backup system. That cannot be the primary system. So,
It's more of an add-on kind of thing, I think, more or less.
Yeah. Okay. So, any other comments from the board about the plan of action here? Any motions? It would be a motion to approve the comprehensive wastewater management plan or plan of study as presented.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second, Bowman. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. Moved by McDonald, second by Froman. Discussion? Judy?
The plan, this outline of the plan and the direction that we'll go, I think at a certain point we need to say, okay, we need to keep moving forward with this. And, my sense was that it covers quite a bit of what I was looking for. I always want more and more and more public comment, but just because I think that having a variety of people from a variety of perspectives involved, helps to make it an even stronger plan. But in terms of a starting point for a plan, I think this aligns with what the contract was. Anyways, we're already moving forward with it, right? With the action, so.
Yes. So we've already started looking at the needs assessment, gathering data. We've been working, we've had regular meetings all along with staff to get that information and to come up with information for the workshop that we'll be planning next month.
Great. Judy?
Thanks. I found my yellow hand. I think, you know, when we're talking about the stakeholders and all, I think sometimes we might not even know all of the stakeholders that need to be involved. And I do think we, you know, just need to keep a running list of who all the stakeholders are. I think it's, you know, maybe it's less important that it's, you know, every single person or entity is identified in the plan, but that we keep a ongoing conversation and list with Helen and her crew. I think that would do.
I think Helen too, you know, if you haven't already looked at the '07 tie-in bond report for downtown, I wouldn't focus a lot on that one because that one was just, you know, out in left field. And you know, I've gone through that whole report, and it actually was why we had such a large bumped up number committed to the Upper Bay project. So when Upper Bay was looking at a 10 million gallon project, it was because that '07 report said downtown Buzzards Bay would need 2 million gallons. And I can tell you all of Wareham doesn't use 1.5 million gallons. So that was just, you know, you can only spend so much time on it. But
No way. Right. There's some.
I think you're muted, Helen.
Sorry. There's some information that is very valuable in there, some of the basic information certainly, and we want to make sure we cull that out. One of the things we are focusing on is the community spent a lot of time on your comprehensive plan, and it was very inclusive, and we're really looking to incorporate the mission and the goals associated with that into the comprehensive wastewater management plan. I think it has a better sense of where you're going from a growth perspective in the community as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, we have our motion and our second. Any other discussion? Roll call vote. Judy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Jim? Yes. Unanimous, 5-0-0. That's great. We can move forward with that. That's going to be a great step for us. Thank you again, Helen.
Thank you.
All right. So, and I know we got the big hitters on here tonight for the workshop items, but you know, we have a lot going on, and that's why we start a little bit early too, so we'd have some more time to talk through these things. So moving to 3B, it's our ERU system development charge, not the rates, just the system development charge discussion. And everyone should have that in their packets. And I believe staff did some studies of various businesses, and they also provided other communities similar connection fees, if I'm correct. I remember seeing all of that. So did anyone want to start with any comments or had any questions about that? I guess the comment that I would make is obviously when Ty and Bond did this rate study for us last year, you know, we also had them look at the system development charge. And from that standpoint, they did the work of addressing how to collect back the $2.4 million that was expended for the plant. So that's what it's based upon, is the 2.4 million. Now, I believe the denominator is the 150 gallons is the average that's given to a household. So that's your equivalent residential unit, which is 150 gallons. High because, you know, a lot of people don't use 150 gallons, but it's kind of an industry standard. So that's how they arrive at that. So those are the two numbers. So it was easy. It's easy to figure out the number of ERUs needed to pay for the $2.4 million. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So then you do the math, and staff has some of the examples. Hopefully, you've been able to look at the table. So in some cases, some of the businesses would pay less. Some of the large businesses would pay an awful lot more than they currently pay. And then there's some standards of other communities that you can kind of weigh it against what other communities charge for, you know, similar gallonage. So and remember that this is all based on 45% of Title V. So you can actually shift that percentage if you want to adjust the collection method. I think at the end of the day, we never collect the 2.4 million back. That ship has sailed because too many of the bigger developments have already come to town that you would have needed to contribute toward that full collection. And that was part of what, you know, we found in the study was that what Ty and Bond thought we collected, when you added the two allocation formulas together, is not what we collected. We collected far less. So then in the fall, actually, when we transferred those development fees from retained earnings, those were 3 years of collections of all the businesses that have come to town. So we can't catch up now. You know, we can't shift the entire burden of what wasn't collected out of 2.4 million onto whoever, you know, would be coming to town now. So but there's a discussion point there. So the first discussion point is, do we need to collect 2.4 million? So the answer is we probably can't, but we can discuss, you know, what needs to be collected. And then I think this highlights that we really needed a business model back when we did this plant, because if we had had the rate study back then that we needed to collect 2.4 million, it would have been a different allocation formula that was instituted. But none of those numbers were done. And so, you know, we collected what the allocation policy said that we should collect, but it just didn't line up to a business model. So, so what we have to do now is we have to consider moving forward with what's the right amount, and how do we recoup as much as we can without deterring business, but it satisfies, you know, a decent collection that does go toward that capital cost that was invested. So, you know, in theory, if you saw, I don't know, maybe you can run through the examples, Glenn, but I think there's an example in there of, you know, if somebody requested 50,000 gallons, well, 50,000 gallons is half of the new plant. So if you carried that through, you would say, well, they would owe half of the value of the 2.4 million because they're requesting 50% of that. So, but then you look at that in a spreadsheet and you say, no, that doesn't seem realistic that you could collect that. So that's why I say there wasn't ever a business model with all of this. And so you can see in the chart, there's a couple of large, gallonage amounts that, don't seem that legitimate that we could collect that amount, even though that's what the percentage comes out to. So we have to arrive somewhere that works. Right now, I think this ERU system isn't bad, but it probably has to be tweaked for the top end. The top end's kind of high if you compare it, although it looked pretty similar to Plymouth with a couple of those numbers. So I don't know if Tony or Glenn, you have any more to kind of add to.
Yeah, I'll just start and then hand it over to Glenn, because I think we talked about maybe sharing the screen so everybody can kind of see
Okay, great. Yep.
what we're talking about. But he and Tim and Kathleen spent a lot of time on this. I think, certainly I would agree that, when you look at these numbers, it's just not realistic to try to say we're going to, be able to collect these back on the maybe few large projects that might be left. But even when you compare it to Plymouth, you have to look at sort of the economic development of Plymouth, right, and the amount of commercial activity they have there, and big box stores. They got a lot of stuff going on that perhaps they can kind of get away with that. When we're trying to recruit economic development in a very small area like Buzzards Bay, we have to think of the scale, if you will, to say, would somebody come to Bourne and pay $500,000 to get in the game? So we always have to think of it from that, that standpoint as well. So Glenn, do you want me to share that first chart? Just tell me which one you want me to bring up first.
The existing allocation / system development charge versus the equivalent residential units, the one that has the two graphs on it, if you will.
Okay.
And I do want to caution the board about the numbers that you're about to see. We'll walk through the whole thing, and certainly not looking for a final decision tonight. But yeah. So here we go. For the very first one. Now, I'll caution you again that what this really is, these are numbers based on Title V flow. And I think the board has seen now, we've had a few discussions on this. There's a reality between Title V flow and the actual flow that you see coming out of the sewer pipe. And we'll get to that in a second here. But so just so you know what's happening with this scenario here, we picked 5, random developments, 2 large scale, 2 small scale commercial, and then 1 new residential home, just to give a feel for what a new resident would be, what it would cost them in the downtown area. I will tell you, I had a brief conversation with the town planner. She said there really aren't that many subdivisions coming to downtown Buzzards Bay, but we put it in there anyways just to get a feel for it. So the very first column, again, type of project. The second column, Title V flow, right from the Title V regulations. And then the next column is our current fees of what we would be collecting for these types of developments. The first, the 4 commercials have already gone through the process. Those are the actual numbers that you see that we have collected as a town. And then using the ERU system. So again, Mr. Potter did say this, you take the Title V flow, you divide it by 150 gallons per ERU, equivalent residential unit. That's what the typical house uses. That gives you a number. The consultant, this all comes from the Schrader Tie and Bond report there. We multiply that by 3,600. That is what the cost of 1 ERU. And then you see those ERU fees. So again, these are very large scale numbers that you see. I think Mr. Potter kind of hit the nail right on the head. If you look at the mixed use commercial on the bottom there, almost 50,000 gallons, using almost half the capacity. I do want to remind the board also too, in this equation, the consultant was really only looking to recapture the $2.4 million that the enterprise fund was paying, not the entire, was it $9.5 million that the plant costs. So again, almost 50,000 gallons. That's almost half of the 100,000 gallon capacity. $1.1 million in cost. That's almost half of the cost of what the enterprise fund would be paying for that based on Title V. I don't know if there's any questions there. I'd be happy to stop, but I don't want to spend too much time on this one. I want to get to the next one. Really, I think it's more realistic. So in the tie and bond report, the consultant did talk about using 0.45% of Title V. Now, I didn't really see the backup in his report. So we've been doing some work on that right now with our water usage. We haven't completed that yet. We've done the water usage versus the Title V for all the residential properties in downtown Buzzards Bay. I can't remember how many, Tim, if you can remember how many off the top of your head, maybe 500 properties. So we added up all the water that they actually use. We calculated the Title V flow for each house within downtown Buzzards Bay. It came out to be 0.41% of Title V. So I feel fairly comfortable in taking that Title V number, cutting it, if you will, multiplying by 0.45, and that cuts down that number of the Title V flow. So that's, you see the Title V flow with the subscript number 1, and we really cut that down by 0.45. Again, you see the user, the current fees, then the ERU fee. So again, it's taking that Title V flow, 50, which is what they thought the average home used, and then multiplying it by 3,600. So these are costs that you would see if we were to apply the formula that the consultant did recommend for ERUs. So this is that mixed use development off Kendall Ray Place. Again, Title V flow was 46,000. Cut that down to a more realistic flow that you'd actually see in the pipe, 21,000 gallons a day. It is still $500,000 in cost for that ERU system. This is the system development charge paying off that $2.4 million that the enterprise fund is paying for itself. So these are, again, realistic numbers that you see if we were to implement an ERU system today. And I think, as Mr. Potter alluded to, on the lower end, we'd be paying less. Small commercial addition, there was only 79 gallons. They would be paying less. Even when we approved the yogurt shop, not a heavy user, they'd be paying much less. There are larger scale developments, much heavier wastewater users. They would be paying, substantially more. Now this is what we did for our calculation. Again, I don't know the board. Can't really see everybody, Jim. But there's no questions. The last analysis that we did look at, Tony, if we can go to the other page. I don't think they're all connected.
What's the next one? Is that the Falmouth one?
Yeah, the proposed versus the other towns.
Oh, proposed. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if I can zoom in or not. Again, we stuck with our five typical developments: 4 commercial, 1 residential. What would be our? Let's say what was the consultant's ERU fees there in that second column? Then you see Plymouth. Plymouth has a very simple formula. Seems very straightforward. They charge $10 a gallon for their system development charge. So again, this seems very straightforward. You can see many of the numbers are very similar. Again, you'd be paying a lot for large scale developments, less for the smaller developments. Town of Falmouth, I also reached out to them. I'll tell you, I also reached out to Wareham. I do have their calculations. We didn't have time to put in the report today. Hopefully at the next time we'll be able to do Wareham for you also. Falmouth said that they charge betterments when they step into a neighborhood, but an upgrade of their wastewater treatment system would probably be borne by the town. So we didn't charge any fees to that. They don't have a formal system development charge. So we put zeros in there for Falmouth. I do think the betterment system does seem much more straightforward. You move into a neighborhood, you're you're providing sewer, you take the cost of the project and you divide it by the number of homes there, you come up with a betterment charge. But I think like we're seeing right now, when you're really not stepping into a neighborhood, you're just upgrading a plant or adding a new plant in our case. How you share that cost is a difficult decision to make. So we did pause here as staff. I can tell you, we do have more work to do on the water usage. Again, we've done it for the residential homes in downtown Buzzards Bay. We're working on the commercial properties in downtown Buzzards Bay. And then we're also working on Hideaway Village. So we'll have hopefully that percentage of actual wastewater flow to Title V flow at our next meeting. Hopefully have that information for you. We do hope to also do the Wareham calculation for you so you can have another data point to look at for surrounding towns. We did want to pause here because of the amount of money that we're talking about here, and maybe get some feedback from the board, about, if you will, the business friendly aspect of this, and whether or not we think these numbers are too high, if we think they're right on the money. Again, we'd like to have some feedback from the board before we make our next step. I think that's all I have right now, Jim. If there's any questions, again, I'll be happy to answer them.
Jim lost his connection here briefly. He's trying to log back on. As the vice, I'll go ahead and step in. Thank you for all that information, Glenn. Very thorough. Do we have any questions? I see Judy Froman.
Thanks. So when I read through the document initially and read through it again and also listened, it does give me pause to throw such a dramatic amount of money towards, to someone who might come in and develop in our commercial district. That really, it does cause me some concern, and it is really helpful to have the numbers side by side. And I do look forward to having the numbers from the other towns that you mentioned, because it is a competitive market, and but Buzzards Bay has some property that is kind of like a blank slate, and has great potential. So it still gives me pause. I'm not excited about shifting to the ERU. I like the concept, but I'm not sure that that's the right shifting, and to be putting so much of the burden on the businesses.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, it is hard. I agree. To put all the onus on the commercial businesses coming in. I mean, it doesn't make it a friendly place to bring your business. Tony, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, yes, thank you. I kind of equate a little bit to, why we don't use a split tax rate, right? So, you have to have a certain amount of commercial activity, right? So typically, you're looking at like 80-20, an 80-20 split, for some towns that, will consider a split tax rate, because there's a downside to that, certainly as we want to recruit businesses into town, because it's a good thing, not just for, the business to come in, but it actually supports the community, right? People want, good businesses to come to their town that they can visit and patronize and that sort of thing. But I think as we look at, what is the right number? I can tell you in talking to, one of the big developments that did get completed in the downtown, and some of the comments about the fees that the town charges when you add them all up. Remember, we're only one portion of that. This particular project paid, $250,000 to connect water. And then you add on, if, we're putting another $500,000 on there, that's a lot. But I think as it relates to our sewer system, one of the things we have to consider is scale. I think when we're looking at the increases in the rates to the ratepayers and things like that, frankly, with a mathematical background, a lot of it is based on scale. And I've said this a number of times, that we have a really small system. We're putting a lot of different costs are coming into that, some under our control and some not. But a lot of it's based on scale. That's why, adding users is critical if it's going to stay in sort of its current, construct. So that's sort of the rub right now, right? Is, how do you add enough users? I mean, even, adding, Calamar whenever that comes online. And frankly, I'd be surprised if we, don't see that in FY22 at all. But that's $100,000, right? But our rate, I mean, that affects the rates a little bit, but that's not the cure all. Now you start looking at, there's not many projects left in the downtown that are going to be bringing in those kind of numbers. So anyways, as we work through this in the coming months and years, a lot of it, I think we really have to consider scale in determining, what is the best structure for, for sewering. But
Thank you, Tony. I see Jim is back, but Tim, you had something? Go ahead.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Vice Chair. Tony makes a great point. The scale is definitely a part of the conversation, but the one fact, when we worked with Ty and Bond, I got to work with Mr. Schrader. The thing he pointed out was a lot of these water districts, they charge a certain fee, but the wastewater was always more expensive. And obviously Buzzards Bay Water District's in a different situation. Water is, not scarce, but it's definitely at a point where they're charging, a significant amount. But the fact that we charged, 40% of what the water total was alarming to me with our current fees. So I just wanted to kind of put that fact out there as like the subtext of this conversation. I've said it before, but I just wanted to bring it up again.
Yeah, that's definitely something, the scale and where we stand based on other folks, meaning other towns, other entities like the water department. I think all of that comes together. So I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Jared. Sorry about that, everybody. Just got booted. Couldn't get back in a fast time. So I know I missed some things that you probably talked about. Actually, I'll take Peter, and then I have a couple comments. Go ahead, Peter.
I think part of the problem is for many years, the Buzzards Bay Water District tried to keep their rates low and affordable. And as a result, there was no long-term planning for restoration and replacement of old water mains. And now you look at the sewer district, you were subsidizing it all these years and trying to keep the rates as affordable as possible. And as a result, we have infrastructure on our end, that we have to start paying. So it's like a perfect storm all the way around between the water district and the sewer. So now we got to find a sweet spot somewhere. But unfortunately, it's time to pay the piper, and we got to see if there's grants out there or any way that we can make the pain as less as possible. I mean, it's nice what they did over the years, but at some point, we have to pay it sometime, and now it's the time.
Thanks. Judy.
Yeah, mine's just a quick question back to Tim before I lose it. You said that the sewer rates are a higher percentage of based on the what? Can you run that by again? I want to make sure I have it.
Sorry, no, I mean, I jump around when I speak, but typically wastewater is more expensive than water because of the infrastructure costs. It's more of a higher cost typically. And when I looked at every town, he'd show me like a report that he had, because he works with all these different municipalities. And it was striking to me that we charge less for wastewater. We were one of the only towns that did that.
Mr. Chair, I just want to be clear that when Tim's talking, he's talking about what the consultant was telling us about wastewater costs. The consultant from Ty and Bond, when they were doing that study, they pointed out to us that in virtually every single case, the cost of sewer is higher than the cost of water. And when we were all surprised, again, when the hotel got the bill for $250,000, we were all surprised by it.
So just a couple things here, and this is just for the board's, thought process. I know when you see some of those larger numbers, and like I said, even if you're using half of the capacity and there's a $500,000 tag associated with that, that's the cost of wastewater. And I'm not saying that in our specific example, that's what we should do. But there is a significant cost when we build a plant that you have to pay for. And what happens, and I think this happened, was some people, maybe past administration or however it manifested, they kind of arrived at a number. They looked at that '06 allocation policy and the 2017, and they kind of arrived at a number that they thought was reasonable to charge, but it wasn't based on a formula. It was sort of based on what do we think, is amenable to the business to get them to come and won't scare them away. And so I think that that's a very scary business model, because now we're here because we under collected, and obviously we can't over collect to make up for that. But I would offer this. So it's very common when you do a sewer project that the expectation would be betterments, and betterments are paid over 20 years, and that recoups the cost of the capital investment. And so I could foresee working with a very large entity to spread that payment over time, much like they would in a betterment situation anyways. And it actually would be helpful because it provides a more stable cash flow, and you don't rely on this one-time payment. And we all saw what happened, right? Those system development fees got put in, and it wasn't over time, so now they're all gone. The 3 years of what we collected is gone to help offset the increases from last year. But I think we could work out a method on some of the bigger payments that I think we could still stand to collect a reasonable amount of money and spread that over time. And I think it would provide stability to our system itself financially, and it would also collect what we really need to collect for those investments to the system. So it's just some thought there. Obviously, you wouldn't do it on a much smaller project, but I could foresee something on the larger end scale. We're only talking about a few of those projects probably in 5 or 10 years total ever happening. So it's definitely something I think it's worthy of consideration, and I think the business itself would prefer that, because a lot of times they don't have all that upfront money, but spreading it over time, that probably would work for them. So just some thought. Jared? Mute. You're on mute.
I apologize. My mouse stops working every so often, so I have to do the touchscreen. I'm just trying to clarify a little bit with Tim Leiden's comments and Glenn's comments. We're all talking about the connection fees, and I think it's important that we, make sure everybody's on the same page with that. And the other thing is that there's a sizable amount of things that are coming into play here. Peter made a good point about, we've been trying to protect the rate from increasing in leaps and bounds for a number of years, and so has the water department. And then we talk about these connection fees and how typically the sewer connection fee is higher than the water connection fee. But here in Bourne, Buzzards Bay Water District is kind of running not scarce, but low, let's say, with their water. So their fees have reacted to that. But I think we I think what's important is that we put together a system and have a formula for people to look at and to use. We want to be sure that we're not just pulling numbers out of thin air and throwing them at, throwing them at people or at the, the forums and saying, well, I don't think it's going to work. So we'll just pull this number out and add it to that. We need to stay away from that. That's kind of really unfair. You want to create a fair opportunity for everybody, but we need to have a formula that works to try and draw businesses in.
Thanks, Jared. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of want to make the exact same point and to get to Mr. McDonald's point. This is, Jared, I always think of it as the connection fee. This is the pipe in the ground connecting to our sewer versus, the annual rate fee. I think I've heard it and I just want to kind of say it again. This is an equation based on reality. This is the reality of what the sewer users are being charged, the $2.4 million versus the amount of flow that's being given by that, that 100,000 gallons a day. I think we were very realistic in looking at that Title V flow. I think we've seen before, that's really the difference between the allocation that you hear people talk about and the actual flow. We're still only sending 112,000 gallons a day to Wareham. We're well below what our allocation says based on Title V. And, I think we're seeing that in reality when we look at the actual water usage of these homes versus Title V. The other thing, I'll tell you, just kicking around the office, we said, well, what if you put a cap on it, right? What if you just say there's a maximum fee that any developer could pay? But, then we also have to take a look at that. Again, we're basing numbers on reality. You have to make up that funding in some other way, and I think if that's, one of the directions we go, I don't know where we're going to go right now, but, we have to be honest with the folks at home about how we're going to make up the other funding source, because it is the $2.4 million that we're talking about. This equation does, equal out to that. And if we do, adjust it to be more pro-business, if you will, we have to talk about how we're going to deal with that shortfall then. And I think that's something we can do just to make sure we're ready to take that on.
Thanks, Glenn. I think what is worth noting, that we just mentioned earlier was we'll never recapture the 2.4 million now because the system development charges that were collected earlier, don't really equate to the number of ERUs that they're using. But I think that 0.45 formula is the closest thing we have to reality now, really moving forward. If we, I kind of said this at the last meeting, I really think we should gravitate toward this because if we stick with the allocation policy we have now, it charges more. And that, we can see that in the chart too. When you add the 2006 and 17 together, it charges more. So I don't think that that's a good way to move forward. And also the 06 allocation formula, it's truthfully, neither one is based, and this was part of our report, that we paid for, but neither policy is based on a mathematical system. So it can't be defended in that regard. It was just the first policy was determined when betterments were being done way back, and it goes by square footage and acreage. And the second policy is based on a down payment and then, a price per gallon. But neither of those policies reflect the actual cost of the system. They're just they were developed, but they don't relate. This ERU method actually relates to what we're trying to collect back, and it's all mathematical and it works. So it's a much more solid footing to be on. I think it was George and then Judy. George.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Yeah, I just have a kind of a broad view of all this. We were talking earlier. I think betterments may be a viable option, something to consider, because I think we're getting into almost like a planning function. I'm thinking about what businesses can deal with how many square feet of space on their facility does it take to make them want to go through this whole process? I mean, it's pretty onerous, and I think it's it just gets into planning. What do we have left for available commercial space in the village? And what is the likelihood that there'll be what are the opportunities, and what is the likelihood that we can find a business, maybe without the help of the Chamber of Commerce, who is willing to go through this task. And we had mentioned briefly just before I exit the split. It becomes a de facto split tax rate if we are adding too much onto the commercial users. And I think it would be good to get the assessor's view on this. I mean, we go through this process every year to look at to review the split tax rate option, and I think it's pretty quick that you decide, no, we shouldn't be doing that. And I don't think the mix of commercial and residential, I think it is pretty obvious, and I think we just have to do a quick look. I think it takes about 10-15 minutes for the assessor to bring us up to speed and decide on that. But it's getting to be that, and I think we, without being overly business friendly, we certainly do not want to make it overly onerous. And I think just going through all the restrictions and the policy innuendos, it's pretty involved. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, George. One of the biggest struggles I've had with this, and it kind of goes back to that 2017 presentation I gave, is that I know what you're saying about, George, about are the businesses paying more than residential? But let's put aside the rate. So we know the rate, everybody pays the same rate. It's not a split rate. So if you're looking at it from a system development side, you would say, yes, the business pays more than the residents because, we don't really have any new homes that are tying in. So they're not really sharing the costs. But here's the thing. When it was sold to town meeting, it was called an economic development project. So you wouldn't expect the residents to have to pay. The expectation was all the new businesses were going to pay for the plant. And that's how it was said. And but it's difficult to collect $2.4 million. And when you don't collect it, now the residents pick it up on their rate side, not they don't pay a system development fee, but the leftover gets moved to the rate now, and now everybody pays. And so that would seem fair, except that the existing users were told, no, you weren't going to have to contribute to this. So unfortunately, we're left with burdening the new businesses in a way to help break down that capital expense that was just supposed to be an economic project. So it would have been all new businesses that came in that would have paid toward that. And we do have some businesses that did and do want to come in, and they're waiting on water. And so there still is some opportunity for business downtown. But it's a tough position, because if we don't treat it like the economic project that it was sold as, then the existing ratepayers have to make up the difference. So I feel like we're always caught between that rock and the hard place. We can't be burdensome on the business, but then if we're not burdensome on the business to some extent, not overly burdensome, then the ratepayers that are mostly residential have to pick it up, including existing commercial too. Everybody has to. Tony?
Yeah, I think just, related to that, and this kind of came up last night when Gary Maloney was on the call, and he brought up I think a good point in that, it goes back to what did town meeting actually vote on that night? And I think I read it during my presentation about, the motion, which is really the action that town meeting took, irrespective of any discussion that goes back and forth at the microphones. But, what's, interesting about that is, the fact that he said that, I think there was, I counted up like 170 people were there. And I think he pretty much counted there was only 30 people from Buzzards Bay that are actually on the system, So it brings up that question about, we take these things to town meeting, that the vote in that particular case affected more or less 1,100, users. But the majority of people that voted on it aren't even from the wastewater district. And that, that can be a little challenging, right? Different than water, right? So the water district, just the district voters get to vote on stuff that affects them, when you look at a water district. But in this case, the majority of the people that voted on it, what they voted on didn't really affect them, right? Or shouldn't have, because they weren't part of the motion. It was pretty much all going to be picked up. I mean, their part, but the part for the sewer enterprise was just the 30 people that were there. So it's an odd situation when you think of it in a governmental context on how things get passed in a town meeting, situation.
Right. So, but I mean, that's where we're at, we, I think we should shift to the ERU, system development charge, with the 45%. I think staff, or we can talk with staff about working out the top end of it, that might seem pretty high, but I mean, how many projects could it ever affect? We only gained 100,000 gallons to our system. So if you had two 50,000 gallon projects that want to tie in, then that's good and bad news. That's how you have to look at it. So,
Yeah, so one of the questions that I don't, we talk about the new plan. It's everything from sort of Perry Ave down towards Belmont Circle. Well, Ryan, the project at 2 Kendall Ray Place, that's further down. That I'm assuming that wastewater is going to Wareham, not to the new plan. I don't know. Is everything on Kendall Ray going to the new plan, or just from Perry Ave towards Belmont Circle?
I think it will go to the new plant from there.
It will? Okay. But Keystone doesn't, and it's going to be further down than Keystone, but
Their connection's in the
Yeah.
driveway.
what's that?
Their connection's coming out of the driveway and goes straight to Main. Kendall Ray connects to Perry Ave at that
gotcha.
manhole intersection.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Judy?
Thanks. When we were talking about I know I keep going back because I'm just trying to get some ducks in a row here. When we're talking about the sewer rate being using the 0.45 of the Title V, and you're talking about comparing it to the water usage. Was that just the water usage this past year, or was that like over time? And then I have more to say.
It was only for the past year, 2020. So that's the data that we had.
Do we have any data from like the year before COVID? Just out of curiosity, I mean, because it was such an unusual year, but I don't know how, how that would have compared, water usage year over year. I think it's a little fraught with, a little worry, say, comparing to a year that at least superficially looks like it could be unusual.
But I think the study was based on the year prior.
I
Because the,
think what she's saying is the information we put in the packet was from the last year.
oh yes, the
You
information.
might see is commercial down and actually residential up because people are working from home and home a lot more. So I don't know if that balanced the two out, but yeah, it would be. I mean, we obviously have data from prior years because that's what we use to generate bills and overages and things like that. So I think for this one, they just wanted to get a snapshot, but
Yeah.
certainly COVID impacts, need to be considered. We could probably, take a look at, 1 or 2 years, before that, or what was in the report if that was a year prior to COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to be, keep loading on to get a lot of details, but it's good to have the integrity of the data. I do think that, the idea of the ERU sounds like I like the fact that it's a formula. I like the fact that it's formula based. I'm feeling like we need definitely need some more comparisons of different variations, and maybe it's a matter of crunching numbers in different having someone, I don't know if it's staff or if we hire someone to do it, but to just kind of present a number of scenarios. I mean, there is a boatload of information here, which thank you so much for pulling together, both Jim and the staff. And it's a lot of information, and to cull through that was important. But now I'm ready for more comparison charts, because I love charts. And just to see what are some different variations. And I keep thinking about, the kind of the offhand idea of, well, if we didn't have a sewer enterprise and it was a sewer department that was, branched out to, throughout the town, I think, I know that takes a long time for that type of thing to happen. So I'm trying to get a grasp of, okay, what's the timing of these types of things? If we need to make some decisions for our next, like for the fall town meeting, that would mean that we'd need to have some information by the beginning of September, likely. And I'm wondering how we can, how important it is. It seems very important to me, but to get some of these sewer numbers, both the the rates, but also the this ERU concept, and just have it so that we're ready. I know it's really pushing things pretty quickly, but that's unfortunately, I feel like we have we have to be sprinting here. And so anyways, I throw that out there. And if we go through all this effort and say through our wastewater management plan study, we discover, yeah, well, maybe we really should be, making it a department. What would be the timing of all that? So those are the things that are bouncing around in my head.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, thank you. I'm inclined to agree somewhat with that. I love checking things off and moving forward in any direction, especially when it comes to things that affect economic development. But I think it'd be good to establish those rates and make sure we do our due diligence and actually publish those rates and make sure that we have them, the impact of these the ERUs before we take a vote. But I'm willing to, I'm just wondering what the risk is by, doing a little bit more research and have some more comparisons.
Well, I guess the only risk really is how do we want to handle current connections now? Right now, because of the water issue, we don't have anyone before us that's new, that's connecting. But that could all change once, DEP lifts or raises the permit ceiling or whatever action they're going to take. So currently we would theoretically be charging under the 2 allocation policies that are existing, which would probably be a deterrent to a large project. And I'm not saying we have to rush this, but we don't meet every week or we are meeting 2 times this month, but that doesn't always happen. And I feel like we want to make some traction here before opportunity is missed, because if somebody submits an application to tie in, then we're either undercharging them or overcharging them. But it's not this ERU because we haven't adopted that. So, that's the flip side of the coin, is we can't kick the can too far down the road. There's only a few large projects left that are going to come to the table, and right now they're just not coming because of the water. So it's actually bought us some time to kind of correct this in-house to maybe the better business model that we need. So I mean that's part A, and then part B is, what is everybody's thought about working with a developer and spreading the cost out like a betterment? Does that have legs? Judy?
Yes, I think that has legs. I think that that's important, because then it makes it manageable and it gives them some time to, get their business going, because it's always, the first few years are always kind of swimming upstream. So I think it's a good idea.
Jared?
I do like the betterment option, also, but I think, much like having a formula, we have to get it narrowed down, and again, Jim, you're right, we are kind of fighting against time. So I think it's important to look into the betterment options, and maybe have a little bit further discussion on the ERU and have some tweaks possibly by staff. I think that's the route to go, and then maybe we can have have one more meeting on this topic to finalize it, but not wait another month. Maybe we can do something just a little bit quicker, maybe 2 weeks.
Well, we do have another meeting in 2 weeks.
So, right. So maybe we can get it finalized and done by then. That's just my thought. Thank you.
George?
Just one more question. Thank you, Jim. One more question about betterments. There is a maximum flexibility. There is. I think it currently is set through Massachusetts law that it has to be at a 5% unless you pay up front. But is there not an option for a 5-year, a 10-year, and a 20-year repayment schedule?
Well,
everybody knows that. Does that apply to these betterments?
Well, so I don't think this necessarily would be a betterment, but I think we would have to treat it with the mechanism of the betterment so that at least it's recorded as some type of lien, I think, for it to work correctly. But I know for a fact that we can vote any percentage up to 5%. So now, obviously, I think that the Cape County uses 5, and I think Clean Water Trust uses 2. But that, it's for admin costs. It's for somebody to put together the documentation and file it. And so I get that. And we would obviously be adding an admin burden to the staff for if we chose to do that ourselves. Or if we used another entity, then we would have to use their percentage and pass it off. But that's not to say we can't do it in-house. It's not like we would be doing that many of these. That's probably a one-off type thing. So, it may be, I don't want to speak for staff, but it may be possible to do it in-house, and we could figure out what the cost of that would be, and if it even amounts to much of a percentage. But I think it might be a nice olive branch for businesses to show that we'd like to work with them and not charge a large fee up front, but we'd still collect that fee over time. And that way, I think everybody wins that way. They get their project, they don't have to secure as much cash up front for their financing. And our needs are met. And also in a payment plan method, we can kind of count on a stable payment each year, as opposed to one big payment up front and then making sure that is put aside in the right way over time. So
Well,
it might,
yes.
it might be helpful.
Certainly if it's not a cash flow issue. I do see some financial staff on board tonight, and we actually go through the town administrator before we move on something like that, because I'd hate to make a unilateral decision that would cause, I don't think it'd be a huge number of units all at once, but I think it would just be added work, and I'd certainly want to get feedback before we made a decision that affects other people. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, we'd have to talk about the process, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I don't want to burden you guys. I just think at least it's an option that we could talk about if it's a function that we could do. We could probably put a cost to it. And
Yeah, I mean, help from
figure
budgeting
that out.
and cash flow, like you said, when we do that, and for helping to predict rates too, right? Because you can flow that in as part of your rate development, forecasting.
Peter and then Tim.
Take Tim first.
Thanks, Jim.
Tim
It's not-
first.
Yeah. So it's not really unlike the road betterments we do. And I want to say this, the legislature outlined sewer betterments at the inception of betterments in general. It's just a lift in the beginning. And then once we hit our stride, I think we have the templates and things like that. So it's really not unlike the road betterments.
Right. That's a good point. Peter?
Do you think it's appropriate at this point that if there's no more discussion on this, because there's a lot to absorb, that we continue the discussion of the ERU to the next available sewer commissioners meeting?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If
I'd
that's,
second that.
I can see that we can't make a decision tonight, and that's fine.
Do we want to, is it a motion and okay, I'll second it from
To move it to the next meeting. Okay. There's a motion by Peter and a second by Judy. Any discussion on moving it to the next meeting? Roll call vote. George,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Judy,
yes.
Jim, yes. 500 unanimous. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, 3C is our sewer policy and regulations, section 1 and 2. There are some spelling fixes, I think, that need to be made here. The documents that are in the back, which are the attachments, are meant to change with the current rate. So the whole idea with those attachments was, as the rate changes, or if a fee changes each year, or 6 months, whatever. C is our sewer policy and regulations, section 1 and 2. Uh, there are some spelling fixes I think that need to be made here. The 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 documents that are in the back, which are the attachments, are meant to change with the current rate. So the whole idea with those attachments was, as the rate changes or if a fee changes each year or 6 months, whatever that is, it's easy enough to change one page. So attachment A, it's easy enough to change the rate than to go back through the entire regulations and try to change sentences and make sure you catch every spot. So that was the thought there. So it's not up to date because they're kind of frozen in time from when they were created and we haven't adopted them. But once they were adopted, then they would, unfreeze and change with the times. So that's kind of the methodology there. The other part of the methodology is, so one attachment would be for commercial user, one attachment would be for residential user. And then I think attachment, the one with the pump station, would almost never happen, but the significance to it is if somebody had such a project that required a pump station, that's what it's there for. Because there's a significant cost to adding a pump station, and we have to make sure that if it's a privately built pump station that, it doesn't fail, or that there's a security to make sure that, it can be repaired and back in operation quickly. That isn't common. Usually it's a very large development that would require that, or some difficult geography that you'd have to, get uphill or something. But it's good to have the just in case in there. It doesn't mean that it will apply, but it could apply to a certain project if they had, a significant amount that needed to be pumped. Not unlike what we did at the community building, to get it to our plant. We have to pump it there because it's a significant amount. So it would be a similar situation. Not likely that it would be used, but it is good to have something, there. And that's also part of these policies and regulations, was to try to cover a lot of bases that weren't covered previously. So there are a lot of sections, and we're not really looking for all the sections tonight. But one is the definitions, and of course, I think we took note of some of the spelling, or the words just to match. And section 2 is really important because that's the allocation policy. And that has the fixed language that now changes it. So if you're just changing flow, you go through the allocation process. Remember the last meeting, I talked about, we had a few projects in the last year that changed flow, but didn't require planning board review. So it was outside of our policy, and therefore they weren't reviewed under the policy, and they didn't pay for a tie-in or gallonage. And then we had a project that did go before planning, and they only had a delta change of 50 gallons, and they had to pay $5,000. So changing the language here in section 2 puts everyone on the same level playing field. And it's just a simple tweak of if you just change flow, and it doesn't have to do with planning board review anymore. So I think that's a good move for the board to make. And then the other sections, you know, we kind of have to take them in more. But does anyone have any other comments about the definitions or the allocation policy? Or questions? Jared? You?
I'm just, I don't know. I don't feel 100% on all the definitions. I think some fine tuning could be done there. Um, but I'm comfortable with it as is, just to start moving things forward. But I think that's one of the things that we could definitely, um, definitions are one of those protective things where it makes everything understandable for everybody. So I just, I like to be clear on those. But other than that, I do feel comfortable with it. But those are things can always be changed along the way. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know, it's not like every T is crossed and every I is dotted. I won't make that claim. But I know staff put a lot of work into this too, and they reformatted the whole thing from where it began. And I have to say, it's way better than what we're working with now from 1989. So we can say that word's misspelled but if you look at the dot matrix printout from 1989 and you think that's what we're going by, you're not really losing a lot to adopt these and replace that. And don't forget, the sewer commissioners come to your property to inspect the pipe too from 1989. So that's not in these, but it's good to make these updates. And I agree with you. Opt these sections, and we can still make those minor changes.
So it sounds like we're losing Jim. So I'll just step in here real
Yeah,
quick.
I'm back. I'm back.
Oh, there he is.
Froze. Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that these regulations do have in it, there is the abatement form there, which the old regulations really don't have. We had a couple applicants come to us and ask us about the waiver procedure, and literally as staff, we had to sit there and tell them, I'm sorry, there is no waiver procedure now. We tell them the board can decide, the board can take a vote on whatever the board wants to vote on, but there was no formal procedure how they actually go about abating their bill, how they challenge it, nothing of that sense. The other thing that I really like about this policy change here from our existing one, it's all the allocation talk. To me right now, I know we're still working on that old allocation policy, and we're kind of blending the two of them together. But allocation to me is I kind of like it to simplify it. That's before there's flow in the pipe. Once there's flow in the pipe, you have flow in the pipe. You can do all the calculations. I am a professional engineer who has designed Title V septic systems. You can do all the calculations you want. The water that flows in that pipe is the water that flows in that pipe. You get numbers out of a book and a chart and do all the studying you can. That's reality, though. So I prefer to get to that as fast as possible. That's kind of one of the things I like about that ERU system. You're charging people for what they're actually using, and along with this policy too, versus what Title V is telling you, which I think, I'm fairly comfortable saying that, Title V is probably over-designed. There's a capacity there that they probably want to make sure that they don't fail, so as an engineer, that's what you do. You put in a factor of safety. You increase the flow so it doesn't ever, so it doesn't fail, at least not right away. But yeah, there's a lot of things I think that are good with this policy that will help the community and help staff, honestly. Sometimes you write regulations, they're difficult to interpret because maybe they try too hard to think of every scenario. It's very difficult to do in regulations. So, we'll listen to the board. I believe I've already seen comments come in from the public here. So, we can take those comments and work on it and bring this document back to you. But I do think you're going in the right direction. I'll tell you that much.
Thanks, Glenn. So what's the pleasure of the board?
So I have a question. If some updates and changes are made, they're all, a lot of them sound fairly slight. Is it appropriate to have it go to a final reading at the next reading, or do we hold off? I'm a little vague on that.
Well, for sections 1 and 2, if we're talking about those, we were at the final reading. So if we want to final read them some more, we can do that, I guess. I don't know. I don't think there's a rule against a 4th reading.
We are meeting in 2 weeks. I mean, I don't think we want to wait a month. So,
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
we can make some of the, grammatical and, clean up a few things. But also, when you have something, as comprehensive as this, until you start actually working with it, we'll find things here and there that, might need clarification or whatever. So we want to get them as close to, perfect as we can, but we got to get moving on some of this stuff just because we are working with something that's, 30 years old.
Right. Peter.
I think it's appropriate to defer action to the next meeting, which is in 2 weeks, and we've waited all these years. What's 2 more weeks to get the information updated, and that way when we go to vote for this, and ultimately approve it, there'll be no more changes afterwards, at least short term, at least.
Okay. Jared.
Yeah, I think I'm on board with the consensus. Let's squeeze that into the next meeting in a couple weeks, and I think we can hopefully. I don't see why we couldn't do all of them at that point, and then it's all one fell swoop, and it gives everybody a chance to reread and double checks, dot I's and cross T's. Thank you.
Well, let me ask then. I like giving homework. Do we want to take on another section or 2 for a second reading for the next time? Because we're still on section 3 through 9. We really haven't talked about those more. So I think it's helpful for staff if we at least start making some more traction on some of the other sections as well.
I think that's fine.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, and we all know how Judy likes to have policies and procedures and readings.
Okay.
Process.
So let's call it 3. I'll call it 3 and 4. Sections 3 and 4 are in, kind of the next. 1 and 2 we'll clean it all up, and 3 and 4 we'll start, maybe having some more discussion about what we see there. Okay. Judy.
So I kind of hesitate. Oh, well, okay. So we're approving section by section. I know that's what we all agreed upon. I feel like there probably should be some, I don't know, something on town, like on the news section of the website saying that, we're going through this process in case somebody, people are interested, and to keep an eye on the sewer commissioner's agendas. Because I always had hesitate, to think, okay, somebody might be, find out about it. I mean, before I was in this seat, I didn't look at the agendas every single week, so, as a common citizen. So I don't know. I just put that out there.
No, I agree with you. Some of these changes do affect, existing use to their benefit. Actually, some of the sections are spelling out things in a much better way than they were before. But we should always get public feedback from the district itself or the enterprise system users to give us some feedback. Tim?
I just wanted to say section 3 is basically the meat of the actual policy. So it's the sewer connections portion that outlines who has what responsibilities. Probably the most important section that we're going to review, just to let you know. And when you guys review that, I think the feedback from that section is very important, because then we're going to in turn pivot and probably create a more formalized inspection procedure with the DPW.
Okay. Good to know. All right. So move right along to item 3. I think we're on D now. So the sewer enterprise financial policy. So this is something that if we forget about the newspapers for a little while, this is something that has probably been a long time coming, that has been needed for this system. Because we don't have a financial policy for the enterprise, or for the retained earnings, at least specifically. I mean, for the whole enterprise is one thing, but for the retained earnings specifically, then it allows us to pick and choose numbers. So, I pick 25,000, you pick 50,000, or conversely, I say we should save 400,000, and you say no, we should only save 300,000. So who's right and who's wrong? And I think that we need to decide that as a board, to stabilize our financial security of the system. Because on town meeting floor, yes, anyone could come forward and propose a different number. But I think if we have a policy at least to fall back on, we can start to cement what our belief is to that system. And so I had staff include some examples. Believe it or not, there's not a lot of examples out there, and that's fine. But so we're forward thinkers. There aren't a lot of examples of retained earnings financial policies, and that's because people do use the retained earnings like free cash, but not every community is equal, in the sense some communities may have a much more established system. We'll just stay on sewer for right now, because that's what we're on. I mean, there's other enterprise funds, but some communities might have a system that isn't growing. It only needs to be managed. Some communities might have whatever financial reasons or pressures on their specific system. So I think we have to build a policy that works for us. It doesn't have to. So the examples are examples. They're kind of models of what other communities have done, but they don't necessarily have to be our model, but they could be a template from what we work with. And I think one of the themes that I found that is useful in some of the other communities is that they take the obligations of debt and they start there as the ground. So in our case, our debt obligations first would be like Wareham. So we would start with our IMA amount that we owe Wareham each year, and then you would add the capital that we owe, and that would include the new capital that they're going to be billing us for. And if you just took those two numbers, so our IMA is approximately 400,000 a year to Wareham, and their 9 million capital the 17.91% that we owe from that is about 1.6 million. So if you added those two numbers together, and you called that the financial policy just as a baseline, you'd have $2 million in retained earnings. And the importance to that is, so if for whatever reason the collections weren't available in that year, we could pay our bills. And that doesn't include any capital expenses on our own behalf. So if we had a pipe break, it still wouldn't cover that. But like I said, every example is different, and sometimes it's apples and oranges, and I get that. But if we want to look at IceWim, for example, it's a $12 million operating budget, and they have $12 million in retained earnings. And so again, call it apples and oranges if you want, but that's another example just right in our own community, and it's not someone else's community. And we really roll the dice with our existing operation of retained earnings. And now that we've added the new plant and the pump station, and we have these 30-year-old pipes, some of which are going to get a new dynamic flow of sewerage in them that they never had before, because the pump station's going to draw it in a different direction and send it. Hopefully we don't have any breaks, but it's also an existing system, and you don't know until you turn it on, what kind of pressures we'll put on the existing system from the new one. So it's always smart to have some type of savings so that, we can account for these breaks, and they will happen. I mean, even I think this past year, there's been a few water breaks that the water district has had to deal with. So we're not unsimilar from that. And so that was the start of the discussion tonight. And I think that at least those two factors would be smart to start with. And while it would be very difficult to build the retained earnings, maybe the $2 million, it's not impossible. It would take a significant amount of time. But I think it also just talks about at least that's a direction that we're trying to save as opposed to spend from it. Spending from it is where we're rolling the dice. So those are some of my thoughts. I see Tim has his hand raised, so I'll go to Tim and then any other board members.
That was a leftover hand, Jim. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. So
An errand hand.
George.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I would like to have some sort of policy that makes sense. We don't want to build up way more retained earnings than we need. However, we do have to have a good metric as to what we're really comfortable with, and what we can, how much of a loss we can sustain, and not have to go begging, because that causes the system to unravel. And I think, Tony, I know you're my guy as far as looking at our bond rating, and this is just very similar to the regular town budget. We have a certain grouping of accounts that we want to be very judicious about, mainly the free cash and the stabilization, and we should treat the retained earnings similar to that. However, it's slightly different, but it is there's a lot of similarities, and there would be a good it would be a good effort to find out what our comfort level is, and really have something to adhere to. Thank you.
I would agree. I mean, I think one of the things, and we've already, started doing a little bit more research, see if we can find some more examples out there. One of the ones that, or in several that we found, it talked about, maintaining, 20% of the total enterprise fund budget and retained earnings. But you also have to consider, right? So when you look at that, it's easy to say, oh, that must be a good number because town X does that. We have to remember and not lose sight of the fact that, typically that's if you have full control over your enterprise fund. In other words, you have your own plant, you have your own infrastructure, you're not partners with anyone else. And so if you look at ours, you'd say, well, we need between $300,000 and $400,000. But now you have to consider the fact that there's this other entity called Wareham that we have an agreement with where we don't have control, say, over the capital stuff. We're just going to be receiving bills. And so you have to factor that in. It may be that, we need, 2X, right? Or 1.5X of the operating budget to ensure that, we don't, find ourselves in a situation where we can't pay our bills because we get surprised. And again, that's just their part. We have to consider our own, infrastructure needs as well, which we know are significant. I mean, we're just getting ready to look at a project that's nearly $50,000 that we're going to have to do before the end of the fiscal year. So, again, never assume that, you're going to have turnbacks and other monies available when all of a sudden you realize you have a problem that you have to address, right away. These aren't, typically in a system like sewer, you can't defer things when things break or become problematic, because then the whole system could collapse. That's, I think, what you see with what happened in some other towns not too far from us when they defer maintenance and other activities. You're just a stone's throw away, from a catastrophe, and that's really just poor planning, not good management, certainly not fiscally responsible to the community. So, yeah, there's a lot to consider because a lot of this infrastructure you can't see, right? So, that's under the ground and you don't see it until something happens, and then you got to, address it. So, lots to consider, but this is really definitely needed to help guide us. And frankly, it will be a positive as it relates to, things like our bond rating and stuff, as we show we have policies that drive our decision making.
And we adhere to them.
And we adhere to them. That's yeah, exactly.
Jared.
Yeah, I'm on board with both Jim and Tony, and I think it's important that we have, let's call it a formula, a way to create this number, this magic number that we're looking for, and I think that helps also. I don't want to say defend, but I think it gives folks that are on the system, users, it gives them a way to see why they're getting this bill, where this money's going, how did we get to this number, and I think that's important. I think making everything transparent is an important thing today. People want to see where their money's going, how it's getting used, and quite frankly, they want to see, like Tony just said, they want to see that you're having a policy, and George added in that you're abiding by it. If you're not, then they should be calling you out on the carpet for it. And this gives you that protection, if you will, that you're standing by the formula, and if changes need to be made, we'll make them. But at this point in time, that's the formula, and that's how we're going. It gives you something to defend, and also following through. We have that I&I study coming. So we're following through on the protection side of it, but we need a way to fund all of it. And I think it's important that we have a lot of input going into this formula, if you will, and it's important that we really take a good look at it and find a solution. Like you said, there's not a lot of other towns that have something like that in place. This, like you said, maybe we're forward thinking, but it's no different than any other entity. You have to have policies and formulas and have things in writing so that people can see what's supposed to be happening. So that's all I have on that.
Yeah, I mean, part of what I was mentioning and I know it sounded high right now when I said the 400,000 to Wareham is the operational cost, and then the 1.6 million. So the 1.6 million we don't see, and that's why it really boosts the number up high. But Wareham borrowed that amount. So if you take the percentage of what we owe 1.6 million. And we're either going to get a bill for 1.6 million, or I believe it's a phased, I think it's like a 3 or 4 phase project for the 9 million. We're going to get a series of bills that add up to 1.6. Now, if we had 1.6 in retained earnings, we pay the bills. We don't have 1.6 in retained earnings. Who pays the bills? Ratepayers. So that's why it's imperative that we do this, because there's no holidays to this rate, to these retained earnings. There is no, and those factors are coming. Those bills are coming to our system, and and what's that, Tony?
Oh, sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were done. I mean, I have a letter on my desk, right, from Wareham for, basins 3 and 4, which is the beginning of this at, $1.668 million. So, we're potentially going to get an 18% bill on that potentially in FY22. So that was just, that's just the beginning of the $9 million. You're right. It will be phased, but they're coming. That's why, when I gave my presentation to the board last week, I talked about all those things because those are all the warning flags that we have got to be extremely careful as we try to maneuver our way through unraveling all of this to get to a point where, we're addressing the needs of the enterprise fund and, being considerate of the ratepayers. We're really, potentially walking into or walking towards a cliff with not a lot of options to be able to back up. So, when you consider all of that, it makes this whole situation very tenuous. That's why, we didn't recommend the board, increasing the use of retained earnings. If you think about it, when we, look at our free cash policy on the general fund side, and we talk about how much we were over policy, I can tell you we get emailed every once in a while saying, "Hey, why don't you give that back to the taxpayers and reduce our tax rate for 1 year or whatever?" We don't do that. There's better ways to utilize that money, pay as you go capital things the community is looking for, because those are one-time revenues. And those are I have to say, those are the feel-good things that then the next year, all of a sudden, they're going to see a big jump in their tax bill and forget about the fact that, they got a tax, rate holiday. Same thing with the sewer users, right? Every time we do this, we're artificially discounting rates with one-time revenues, and it's not sustainable. And again, from a budgeting standpoint, as all of us do in our private lives, we want some predictability to be able to budget ourselves. And so even though you see rates increase year over year, if we can provide, some stability to how that happens, so people can plan on that. But when you're doing this discounting thing, and 1 year you're discounting $47 and the next year it's $174, eventually those things start adding up. So when you stop doing that, you see what would have been a $500 increase this year on the ratepayers. So, I saw this coming a year ago and mentioned it in a number of meetings, but, we try to do the right thing, but eventually things come back to roost.
Well, I mean, we could put together maybe a formula for next time. I can help. I just wanted us to start this discussion, and you could see some examples of other communities. I think, as was pointed out by staff a little earlier, some of the numbers, if you run someone else's, it might seem low, but I agree with Tony, the 20% or something. We don't control our full system. And so, again, kicking back to the 1.6 million that's going to come our way, none of that 1.6 is budgeted in our FY22. So any amount that we receive for capital, you know, in a bill like that, it's just not accounted for anywhere. And so, you know, we have to start somewhere, and I think I think here's the place to start. And it's also a good place to, you know, level with the voters and the ratepayers about, you know, we're starting here and we're trying to get to this goal. And the goal is to save, not spend, because, you know, the spending is coming, and we really need the savings so that we can spend and not impact the ratepayers. I mean, that's really, and I saw your hand up, Peter, so did you just put it down?
Yes, I did. But I'll wait till you finish.
Okay. So, you know, that's where this is going. So for next time, maybe we can put together, you know, a short little policy. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It just has to be where our goal is of, you know, what we want to achieve with retained earnings. And this has become such a lightning rod of a subject. But in all fairness, the enterprise fund only has retained earnings. We don't have separate stabilization accounts, reserve, you know, we don't really have all these other accounts that we can count on that you find elsewhere. And so every time we need to talk about something, it's usually it has to come out of retained earnings. And so we really need this financial policy to stabilize that account, because everything comes out of that account every time we need to do anything. Judy. And then Peter. Oh, or Peter.
Peter was ahead of me.
Peter, then Judy.
Thank you. Which brings me to my question I ask every other month is, what's the status of the IMA with Wareham? I know we met with the commissioners a little bit ago, and then you and Jad have been meeting, you know, when you do your subcommittee, but at some point we got to get, we got to, you know, get going with the IMA, and so we can start, you know, getting some results from that because of the unknown of what's going on in Wareham. You know, with a new IMA, at least we'll have a better idea of it.
Yeah, so I guess the funny story with that is we're all up for re-election. Jared and I and the two subcommittee on the other side, they're all up for re-election too. So we haven't met recently, but that doesn't mean we won't. Obviously, it's just that's been the status within the last month. Judy.
Well, now I have an extra something to say. Since we're on the subject of the IMA, I think that there had been some conversation, you know, staff to staff. I guess I throw a little bit of caution about trying to push too hard on an IMA, only because, you know, we don't have our new system up and running. We couldn't sustain, as far as I have learned, whatever, we couldn't sustain only using our system. So I think that we have to, you know, be cautious of it. We're not, you know, everybody's in a precarious situation, and, you know, Wareham is definitely, you know, they're going to be looking after their interests, and so I don't know. I guess I just put up a little bit of caution about really pushing that issue. My other comment was about the retained earnings, and what I found to be successful, and it's fairly fundamental in terms of budgeting, is to as you mentioned, Jim, identify the costs that we know about that need to happen, and also, what types of costs are involved with infrastructure if they did fail. So let's say that something does have to be, repaired or replaced. If you look at roads every 15 to 25 years, I don't know, like in that ballpark. There have to be some types of information about how long do wastewater sewer pipes last, how long do pumps last, how long do all those types of things. And I know that the way I usually go about that is to look at, okay, mapping out how many of them there are and when they might expire, and then start crunching in some numbers that would help us get there, and so in our retained earnings, so that you're right, you can't jump to $2 million right away, but what is the practicality of, like, the timing of the needs, or at least the projected needs? And if we I always have my favorite thing here with my job is that I have like the hot water tanks for the systems here, and they're supposed to only last 20 years. Well, guess what? I got 28 years out of it, but it was up to terms, it was coming up on as an option to might have to pay for that in such and such a year. And so we didn't have to. So we we bump it down the road some. So I think, I would like to see what, maybe it's just a brain dump of what are all the types of things that we know would be expenses, and use that figure and look at what the timing is of when those dollars would need to be spent, or it is speculative, but at least it gives you something that's in the retained earnings. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. All right. So, anyone else have anything on that? So we'll
get a draft.
Yeah, we'll get a draft for the next one. At least we, can start somewhere. But consensus that we should have a financial policy and draft something for the next time. Okay.
Yeah, we could even. I'd be comfortable with even voting to say that we need to have a policy, because it is that urgent. And I think that, talking about the rates, I know you just didn't call on me, but oops, excuse me. Sorry. I just started talking. I think that, given all the discussions about the sewer budget and, the direction, the nebulous nature of some of the how we set those rates, I feel like we really do need to have a policy in hand. We need to have some things that are our guiding principles, and so that we can call on it, so that it doesn't get as messy, as we go along. So thanks.
Yeah. Jared.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in agreement. Like I said, we need to have some sort of something to stand behind, something that gives us our direction, and if nothing else, the folks that are users get a chance to see why and where all this funding will come from, and why we have it, and how we got to that amount. So yeah, absolutely, this is something we desperately need. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. George?
Thank you, Jim. I think it's not an election year for me, but I think in doing a policy like this, I think we do have to recognize the primary stakeholders, the ratepayers, and I realize it's trying to balance two things, and it may be too much until the pandemic is over and we end up getting some additional users on here to juice the retained earnings a little bit, but we do have to understand that that is the backside of this whole thing. And but the primary thing is the existence of the overall system. And like I said, if we don't create a policy, we don't adhere to it, then if the bonding agencies don't look at it, then the auditors will look at it. So we do have to have something solid enough, and we have to. I'm not saying we can do this overnight, but I think we have to work toward a policy. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate all that feedback. I think we should do this, and I can tell you from talking to some of the people that communicated with us that there's even the educational component of what is retained earnings. I always kid, it doesn't have like that fancy name, that no one understands, what that is. And in fairness, a lot of people just say, well, take it from retained earnings, and they don't make a connection to what is that fund? How does it impact the whole system if you do that? That there's repercussions for doing that, but maybe we can do a better job of in as part of the policy, kind of explaining what the fund's for and then what the goals are to achieve what we're trying to do with it, so everybody understands what this magical retained earnings fund is, because that's what a lot of the discussion has centered around. So that's really good. We'll bring that one for the next time. And then we have was it 3E, which is the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund reimbursement discussion. So I have this on here because we should talk about, I think I mentioned this last time, but I'd like to have the discussion here and now. If we receive a subsidy, or I guess they'll call it reimbursement. It's probably going to be called like a reimbursement award back to the community for doing a sewer project like the new wastewater plant. Do we want to have a policy for how that money is utilized or saved, or do we want to have some kind of discussion about, is it split, or is the 100% going back to the sewer enterprise fund? That type of subject matter. That's what I'm trying to get at here. We do have the current wastewater facility is on the list for this year for the Cape and Islands Water Protection Board to consider a reimbursement back to Bourne. I can't tell you what that number is, but if we just speculate that it was, and because they haven't done this award yet, I can't tell you what that is. I don't know. But I would speculate it's not a small number. So if it's a larger number, like 100,000 or several 100,000, what's the board's desire with that money? Does it go straight to retained earnings? Does it split to the town for their portion of contribution toward the plant? Or this will come up again, as we do wastewater projects. This is kind of the method, and I can't tell you what other communities are doing. A lot of communities don't have this separate enterprise that we do. So they're probably handling it within their town budget, but I think that we should decide how Bourne wants to address any kind of reimbursement back for a sewer project from the Cape and Islands. So was it Judy or Jared first? I'll go with Judy.
Well, thanks. Mine's because I'm a little bit rusty on, how the fund, the protection fund reimbursement, like, does that fall into our laps to decide who is identified as the decision maker?
So I'll try to walk us through it a little bit. Not everything is set, so I'll do my best. Obviously, there's a board. I'm the representative for Bourne. They have the Mass DEP has a intended use plan projects list, so IUP. That's going to be a very famous acronym moving forward in Bourne. So if you're on an IUP project, you're eligible. Well, that's one criteria. You also have to be involved with the SRF loan program. But we are with both. So our wastewater facility was on, I think it's the 2019 IUP list, and we're also involved with the SRF loan. So we've met the criteria for the board to review. Now, the part that's known is we just received information that it's around $4.5 million that was considered our contribution toward the plant that Bourne made between the enterprise and the town combined. So the reimbursement would be a percentage of the $4.5 million. Now, the board has hired a financial management company to help them with not only the reimbursements, but the percentages that they're going to set aside in the fund. Much like we've talked with retained earnings earlier tonight, they're talking about keeping 50% of the funds in reserves or, some methodology so that they never run out of money and they can fund projects over time. It also isn't necessarily paid once in one installment. It may be paid over 4 years, the reimbursement award. So, you don't necessarily count on a windfall of all this money at once. I don't think it's going to work that way. But they'll make their decision. Right now, it's like at the executive board stage, and then it will go to the full board probably this summer for a vote. We actually meet this week, but it's not to vote on any projects. It's just to review the list and the latest list of new projects that are going to be reviewed at some point. So that's sort of the process. So we're in the process, and we have eligibility, but we don't know what the grant award would be back to the town. And then again, it might be paid over 4 years, not all at once. And so we have to just think about if, some good amount of money came back to the town, how do we want to distribute that? There's no strings attached. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever talked about that. It's a reimbursement reward for doing these wastewater projects and also stormwater. So it's sort of a reward to get people to undertake projects, and then by doing that, you're getting, a portion back of what you contributed toward that project. And And like I said, the percentage could change, or every project's going to be treated separately and reviewed by this financial management company as well. So right now, they told us that our eligibility was based upon 4.5 million. But there's no percentage attached to that right now. And it's not like it, I don't want to get in anyone's head, it's 50% or anything like that. It's not that kind of money. But it could, it could be several $100,000. And so it might be spread over 4 years, and maybe it's 100,000 a year for 4 years or something like that. I won't know until that company has helped determine what the reimbursement should be. But I have to use that as an example because we have a real project and there will be real money coming back to the town. So I don't want to distort what that money is. I don't know what that is, if it's 50,000, if it's 100,000, if, I think we should have a plan. Or what do we do with that money? Do we put it directly into retained earnings? Is that how we build, our retained earnings? I think the last thing I would want to see is that we start using it to subsidize the rate, for 5 years or something like that, and then we're right back into an artificial, and that's why I think this kind of dovetails a little bit with a financial policy to make heads or tails of what we're doing with this. And, it will be real money coming back to the town. And I think we should have a real plan for it. And if it's to save it, then I'm fine with that. I just want the board to discuss, should it be all to the enterprise? Should the town receive some? Or, what's everybody's thoughts on that? So, Jared?
Yeah, so that's kind of my thing. I agree. A policy of some sort would probably be a great idea. That kind of outlines it outlines the different returns that we might get, whether they be grants or returned money that was previously spent. I just think that a policy that covers some of those things, obviously it's probably not going to cover all of them, but at least, again, it gives a guideline. These policies and procedures aren't set in stone. They're a guideline. That's what they're there for. And I think another one to set up would be something like that. Thank you.
Anyone else? In the notes. I mean, I think it's critical. This is what we do: is we make policy and kind of stand by it. And I think it's critical to know what we're doing with this money. There's so many options, and I'm sure Tony and Glenn and staff can think about even more options than we can. But you conceivably you could have money coming back that you could build your stabilization, you could build the retained earnings with. You could split the money. Not saying we do, but I think we have to develop some kind of policy that talks about at least this project. There conceivably can be another project that the town is not involved in. The town was involved with this one. It helped out the sewer users. It was kind of a partnership. But there's conceivably other projects that just the enterprise could undertake, and it doesn't have town involvement. And so therefore, we may want some kind of policy that talks about involvement, or what the expectation is when we have a situation with the town helping the enterprise out. And then obviously another method could be too, you could pay down debt with it, you know, which is the debt we borrowed. So that's just another option. I'm not saying that one option is better than another, but there's other options that, you know, are out there. So how about consensus on this one? Judy?
So I think you mentioned that it also includes stormwater. And I know that that's a humongous deal around, especially with the coastal resiliency and all of that. So, you know, I think, you know, if we're going to do some type of policy and this is related to the Water Protection Fund, I think it would make sense to also have something along those lines that end up benefiting the town and making sure that the, you know, making some headway on our waters, you know, being healthier.
Yeah, and there definitely will be some other Cape communities that are pursuing the stormwater part of it for their grants. That's already on the table. I've you know heard from some of the other towns that are working on those projects. So that's good. We'll put something together. We'll try to put something together for I don't know if the board can give me any more direction on what to put together. Is the thought that there was a partnership in the project and we split the money? Or I'm not talking about percentages here, but or do you think because this is sewer related, it should go back to sewer enterprise? I mean, I would like that kind of feedback because it would help craft the language better. George?
Thank you. Yeah, I think, we're getting a little bit too far ahead because we really don't know the kind of money that we're talking about. But I think it would behoove us to at least look at the genesis of this whole thing. You know, what's causing this this money, and if this is good and it's for the betterment of the town and puts us at the leading edge of what's happening with wastewater and anything that's water related. It should probably be reinvested in making sure that we have the ability to keep generating events like this. But you know, like I said, it's good food for thought, and I think we should really think this out. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Judy?
So I keep bouncing back and forth between the fact that the IUP monies are, is it my correct understanding that sometimes it's IUPs, but other times it's just money that ends up coming from, you know, from the income from the.
No. So I know
I think I'm
all the,
confused.
it gets late at night and everything gets meshed. So the IUP is the DEP. Here we go with acronyms again. It's the DEP's list of projects. The money that's collected is the short-term rental tax, which is disconnected from the reimbursement award. So what Bourne generates is not necessarily what you'll receive as an award. The award is based on the size of the project and the cost of the project.
So it always has to be a project.
So it always has to be a project, and the money just sits there if you don't do projects, and it goes to other communities.
Well, no, make it come to our community.
So for us to get the money that we're talking about here, it's, you know, it's other people's money because Bourne hasn't put that amount of money into the fund just yet. Other communities have. So we would be first at the table for some of that reimbursement. But that being said, it's kind of treated as a Cape community. So all the projects that happen most of them will be eligible for this money, and there will be projects that far outweigh the cost of ours, that will be using monies for many years, probably as a reimbursement. For example, Barnstable has planned $1.6 billion of wastewater projects over the next 20 years. So whether it all comes to fruition or not, but our kind of small wastewater project on that scale, it could be a benefit to us with the money back as a reimbursement, but our money will also go to other projects, somewhere else on the Cape over time. So it evens out. Glenn?
Thank you, Mr. Barr. You might have to help me out with this, Jim. So any project that Bourne would potentially be reimbursed on, it has to be IUP approved, right, by DEP, and then it has to be SRF eligible or SRF approved.
So I believe you have to go through the SRF process and actually take the loan.
So either way, I mean, these are probably all going to be substantially large projects to qualify for those two hurdles to get over. So just to make it clear, and these are going to be, again, very large scale projects, probably larger than most of our stormwater projects right now. We don't really have too many. Maybe we will in the future. We just really don't have that many stormwater projects now that are all that.
I will say, because we're on this topic, and it probably helpful for staff to know as well, and the board, that projects under $1 million, and so I know that doesn't seem like a big project, but SRF loan and on the IUP list, projects under $1 million are going to have a higher reimbursement number, and they're going to have a substantially higher number percentage of reimbursement. So don't lose sight of the small projects as well, because there'll be a lot of those out there, and they'll actually see a benefit for reimbursement over the bigger ones. Tony, and then Judy.
Yeah, so just as it relates to that, just to give you some context, Jim mentioned ours is, 4.66 million. Town of Orleans has a project on the IUP, 60 million. Mashpee, 50 million. Then you go down to 2 million, 17 million. So there's big stuff on the IUP, as Glenn was saying, some of these bigger projects, particularly as towns that have gone through the CWMP are actually building plants and collection systems and all of that. So, as we, look at maybe on the south side of the canal and things like that, we'll be looking at, again, these are huge, huge numbers.
Judy.
Well, so I think I get it. And I guess I'm just curious why it seems pretty straightforward to me that if it's a reimbursement for a specific project, why wouldn't it go back to that project? There, did I write the policy? Just kidding.
I'm fine. No, I totally get where you're coming from, and it could go back to the project. The question is, I don't know what other communities are doing. I really don't. I just wanted us to have a plan of what we were doing with the reimbursement money. So if the thought is the money should come back and pay down the debt to the project, then that's a plan. If the money should come back and be put aside for retained earnings, then that's another plan, but I just kind of wanted some feedback on that so we could at least maybe steer it a little bit.
And I think in relation to that too, like, if you did want to pay down the debt, remember there's debt on both sides. There's debt in the enterprise fund. And remember, 32% of the plant's being paid for out of the general fund. Could pay operation maintenance costs. That's part of the project, right? You got to run the plant. So, there are probably multiple options as it relates just to the project, right? So that the project has multiple facets to it that could be considered. So I think along with what we talked about, related to the retained earnings is one of the things we have in the policy. What are the allowed uses, right? And how do we want to do that? Well, same thing with, we write, a policy related to this, can help guide on what, the potential uses the board or the sewer commissioners may consider for that money.
Right. All right. So we'll keep working on that one, but I'm just trying to get ahead of it before we actually get an award one day, and I think we will. And it's going to be really good news for the town. But I want to get ahead of that award, and we'll have a plan and action ready to execute when that comes. So, all right. Would anyone else have anything on that? Okay. For a new business, I actually have two things. The first one is there was just recently a presentation in Wareham with the directional drilling. We talked about this last time, that we knew that was going to be happening, the presentation. So I did see that presentation, and it was really kind of generated by the company, Kleinfelter, and they do directional drilling. So of course they talked about making it to Mass Maritime with the pipe, and made a couple newspaper articles. But I did want everyone to know that obviously, if anybody pursued a project like that, Bourne has a say in kind of coming into our border, even if it's underground. There's borders for a reason between communities, and beyond that, there's all of the state and federal agencies that you have to go through a permitting process to get permission to do things like that. So that's not really a project that could happen in the middle of the night, and we wake up the next morning and it's all done, and nobody had a say. So it's not like that. And I'm not sure if I think they're just exploring that. It's in terms of like Wareham. Like I said, it sounded a lot like the company trying to sell its services of what it can do. They do a lot of national work with this. I imagine it's a very expensive process too. But so just wanted to touch a couple points there. And then the other thing is, as it relates to the last agenda item that we just talked about, but it's a new topic. We had a conference call with Tony and Glenn and myself had a conference call with the executive board for the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund Board about our potential for asking for reimbursement on the Wareham capital improvements. And so this ties into our home rule petition that we're bringing to town meeting, so that we can work on some language for the home rule, that town meeting will let us work on some language that would amend the Cape and Islands section language that would incorporate our Bourne in Wareham's IMA into the section. So we just were explaining more about what we were looking to do, so they understood. There's a lot of concern that I don't think they knew about the project, and they don't know the arrangement that we had with Wareham. So we've given them the IMA. We've filled them in as to what the project is in Wareham, and that it's on the IUP. Wareham took an SRF loan. We have to do some more follow-up with Clean Water Trust and see about a loan on our end, because I think that is part of the criteria that we'd have to clear. But it sounds like we made some headway into at least explaining what we're trying to do, and then the warrant article that we're trying to pursue. And we're really just looking for our share of the project as a potential reimbursement. So that's kind of where that stands. And we're kind of hoping that we can keep moving that along, that discussion, because like we said earlier tonight, we're probably getting a bill for $1.5 million for this $9 million, capital project. So if we can get this eligible and get some reimbursement, anything will help. Anything would help. So there's really no downside there. So really, that's all I had for new business. There's a lot of good things happening. Anyone else? All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's time tonight. I'm glad we did start a little bit earlier. I didn't want us to get too late, and I know there's a lot here, but I know we made a lot of progress tonight, and there's several things we can bring to the next meeting, and we'll make more progress on those. So lots going on. Appreciate it. And thanks to staff and everyone too for spending all this time.
Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, everyone's working really hard on all this stuff, and I realize that, it's easy to say, but the truth is we've focused so much on sewer, and it's a really good thing, and we're doing a lot of things, and we're asking staff to do a lot of sewer things that are on top of all the other responsibilities that we're trying to do. And so sometimes, we don't have every document uploaded, or we don't have, everything available for the meetings, but I think we're making a lot of headway. And considering just my short time on the board, of where we started with sewer and where we are now, we've just taken it to a whole other realm, and it's paying off because we're closing a lot of issues that were just kind of hanging out there, and we just can't do it alone. So staff's really stepped up on all of these things. So even though we talk about tonight, yeah, we'll bring it back in 2 weeks, they'll be doing a lot of that heavy lifting. So I appreciate all that. All right. Any motions?
Motion to adjourn?
Perlman, second.
Motion by Jared, second Froman. Roll call vote. Judy?
Yes.
George?
Yes.
Peter?
He appears frozen.
We'll go to Jared first.
Yes.
Peter? Yeah, Peter, I think you're frozen. Jim, yes. Unanimous, 4-0-0. And Peter won't be able to get back in.
Good night.
Everyone, take care. Have a good night.
See ya.